It's been a fun series to spend some time in, and it'll be a fun series to push pause on for a little while. We had our Dine with Nine last night, and somebody asked, am I going to be as depressed this week as I have been the last few weeks? And it's hard because this is not easy content to cover. And this week I'm talking about, the title of my talk is called, It's an AI World After All. And you may remember, if anybody has been to Disney World, the old song there, It's a Small World After All, and I don't know why this phrase came into my mind, but it seemed very fitting to me as this week we're talking about just touching on AI. Now, we're not going to get really deep because in order to be able to make use of our time, we would need way more time. And we're going to get into this in part 2, which is going to probably be more in February, to give us some time to let some of this stuff marinate and for us to provide some practical steps. But as AI has become more ubiquitous, it's becoming harder to find ourselves in a world where AI is not driving almost all of the centers of commerce and development. And there's a lot happening. And if you're overwhelmed by the content, by the amount of information, you're not alone. Most folks in the United States, I would say most tech people even, are struggling to keep up with this fast pace. It's happening insanely quick. But the good news is that we don't want to just talk about AI and think about the ways that it affects us, but we want to provide some hope, some actionable next steps, and some ways that we can be part of a resistance to the norm and not simply accept things as they are. I want to start first with a couple of the moment headlines that I saw this past week. This one Shannon sent to me. This is a new device from Kohler. Kohler's toilet camera analyzes your poop. The Kohler Dakota attaches to your toilet rim to evaluate your stool and provide insights about gut health and hydration. Costs about $600 and requires a Kohler Health subscription, which is a funny thing to have a subscription to. The commode camera, you know, when you're going through your monthly bill, what's this charge? Oh, that's our commode camera. That's the one that takes, yeah. But before we get too far laughing at that, I would ask you, just so that we can sit with the nuance of this and not just rush to conclusions, what if, possibly in the very near future, a device like this were to alert you to some colon cancer in your spouse or a loved one? What if a device like this saved the life of the loved one? Earlier this week, there was a massive data outage from an AWS data center. AWS stands for Amazon Web Services. And when we think Amazon, we think of the main website that provides all of these goods that you can have delivered to your door. But one of the big arms of Amazon is AWS, which is this huge data structure, these data points and servers all across the country. And this AWS outage on Monday was triggered by a chain reaction from just a small software glitch, a tiny update that went bad, and then Amazon's Virginia data center led to major disruptions across apps and banks and airlines and hospital systems for multiple hours. You may have used a device on Monday that relied on Amazon Web Services and noticed spotty or no service. And experts highlight that this could be the growing wave of the future. That as we have more and more digital single points of failure, meaning we're putting all of our digital eggs in one digital basket, and when that happens, one small thing can set off these chain reactions. And then many companies rely on this same number of small services provided by just a handful of tech company elites. One of the companies that was affected by this outage was a company that made intelligent mattresses. This article from the New York Times said smart beds help them sleep on a cloud, then the cloud crashed. Smart beds malfunctioned dangerously during the AWS outage, trapping users and overheating while exposing the risks of cloud-dependent bedroom services. No, this is not a fake story. This is real stuff. Some users of the smart bed system sleep, who sleep atop intelligent, temperature-regulated mattresses, which, before we laugh too hard about this, does this not sound amazing, right? If you can program in the temperature of your mattress and like have it perfectly where you need it to be. But sleep, these users woke up earlier this week as they were alerted to this outage in some strange ways. Isaiah Graynett woke up at 1 a.m. drenched in sweat, thinking he was lying on his laptop. When he tried to adjust the temperature, he found that he was locked out of the product's app and was stuck. Quote, "It's not loading because of the AWS outage, which means I have no way to access my bed," he remembered thinking. He ended up sleeping on the heated mattress all night. There's some very weird stories in our future as we explore this coming digital economy that is already here. And I don't want to wrap up this first part of the series by coming down so hard as a Luddite and just throwing all of our technological babies out with the bathwater. To be clear, if you chose to do that, you would probably be happier, healthier, saner than most people. But let's be honest, this has become a part of our culture, our society. Emails, texts, and smartphones are here to stay. And AI is happening now, whether we choose to engage with it or not. But I want to look at this from a nuanced perspective. This is my 24-year-old daughter, Chloe. When she first went to college, in her first week of college, she went into the ER with what we didn't realize at the time was late-onset type 1 diabetes. And she became a type 1 diabetic, relying on devices to take the place of her pancreas. She wears a constant glucose monitor that she applies, and then she also wears other devices, and they connect to her phone so that she can see her blood sugar in real time. The first year or so when she came home, it was tough as we realized how much that we take for granted, simple things like biological functions, autonomous systems in our body. Her boyfriend, Jesse, who is a tech bro and very familiar with some of these things, used a piece of technology that he connected to what's called a Raspberry Pi. It's a piece of open source technology that he was able to use and pull data from her Dexcom. Dexcom is the constant glucose monitor that she wears. And take that data, apply it on a color gradient for her blood sugar, and then change the color of the smart light in her room. He sent us this and showed us, and this is pretty awesome. I mean, honestly, the first week or so when Chloe came home, this would have been a lifesaver of a piece of technology. And I point this out to show you that this is not as simple. It's not as black and white as we would like it to seem. These technologies that are helping certain people are harming others. The social networks that are causing anxiety and depression and division have also been a safe place for marginalized communities who don't have a place to connect. We talked in pre-talk this morning that there are young people in Nebraska who are wanting to come out but can't because they don't have opportunities within their community to have a safe place or a voice. They rely on the internet. They rely on social media to have other like minds, like voices that can walk them through this. This is not black and white. This is a very complicated issue. And if we're going to beat cancer, if we're going to cure ALS and other diseases that have been a part of our culture for many years, more than likely it's going to happen with the direct aid and benefit of some of these new, more targeted AI tools that are being developed. But it is AI nonetheless. So how did we get here? When we're talking about artificial intelligence, let's give a little bit of a quick backstory here so that we can cover a little bit of ground. Before it was called artificial intelligence, some of the earlier terms for it was machine learning or machine intelligence. And the person who came up with those terms, his name is Alan Turing. You may know his name from the Turing test. Turing's 1950 paper called Computing, Machinery, and Intelligence came up with what he called the imitation game, a way to be able to test when technology could get sufficiently advanced that we would not be able to determine whether it was a human or software. And the threshold, I believe, that he established was somewhere around the 36% range there, that if you were to present people with a screen and you're chatting with somebody on the other end of the screen and you don't know whether it's a AI piece of software or another human being, can you tell the difference? And we have, with the advancement of this AI software, this was in the 50s, and I think when Alan Turing came up with this idea, the science fiction books and stories and movies that we were talking about had a very different idea of what the Turing test and what it would look like to pass that. I think in some science fiction books, there is this like huge threshold that we cross where once these pieces of software pass the Turing test, once they become indistinguishable from humanity, that it begins to then take over the world. However, we've been now past the territory of the Turing test for quite a number of years. In March of this year, researchers at UC San Diego reported that ChatGPT 4.5 convincingly passed the Turing test under rigorous academic conditions, persuading human judges that it was a person 73% of the time. A higher success rate, I should note, than the actual human participants themselves. Think about that. In this study, not only was the AI software so good at replicating human language, it did so in a way that most humans didn't even recognize in that ability. And so we're on this very quickly growing, developing field here. So I want to talk about a couple of terms. We are talking about terms like artificial intelligence. And artificial intelligence is a broad term that refers to a lot of different tools. When we think artificial intelligence, you might be thinking of tools like Claude, like ChatGPT, and some of these large language models. And these are definitely the most visible parts of AI that we see in the world today. But there have been limited functions of AI that have been in use now for well over a decade. For example, many of you have used Grammarly before. Have you used Grammarly in writing emails and things like that? As Grammarly develops, this is another example of a very limited use of an AI application for a tool to be able to accomplish a specific goal. But all of these companies, including OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepSeek in China, DeepMind, Google, the goal for all of these companies is something called AGI, or artificial general intelligence. And if you could think of AI as artificial limited intelligence, that might make a little bit of an easier distinction. The artificial limited intelligence means that these models are trained on a set of data to accomplish a limited number of tasks. Now, they're getting better and better at accomplishing more and more. If you look at headlines this year, you've seen things about ChatGPT passing bar exams and medical exams and other forms of high training type tests. These tools are becoming increasingly broader in their experience, but the ultimate goal where Sam Altman and all of the rest like him are shooting for is this holy grail called AGI, or this superintelligence. not just simply mimicking human intelligence to the point where we can't tell the difference, but far surpassing human intelligence to the point where it would begin to grow and improve exponentially. This is dangerous, of course, because as of right now, it is still important to note we are growing these models, but we still have so little understanding of what happens inside of this black box, so to speak. These models can be trained for months at a time, but when they're launched into the real world, strange things begin to happen. We've seen models who have tried to convince people to take their own life and to hide that information from those who need help. We've seen models who have tried to circumvent security protocols that were put into place to keep them in the box. We've seen models that got so good at subterfuge, at lying, that even the developers struggled to be able to notice when the models were actually telling the truth. And they began to even notice that something like a model telling the truth was somewhat of a misnomer, because the only truth that these models recognized was what advanced their ultimate training goals. The reason why I say that is to say this. We're here now. We're still in this artificial limited intelligence. And even still at this small bar, we're not winning. We're struggling to be able to keep these models within the parameters that are being established for them. And yet at this point, we're a matter of years, decades away from what seems to be an inevitable march towards artificial general intelligence. Now, I have a little clip here of someone I appreciate tremendously and have read a lot, Yuval Noah Harari. He wrote books like *Sapiens*, and he's a deep thinker, and he has this to say about what we can expect in a future of artificial general intelligence.
We have no experience in history of a less intelligent species that manages to control a more intelligent species. Horses don't control us. Cows don't control us. We control them. What happens when we create a more intelligent species than us? These super intelligent AIs. So maybe in the short term, it will be good for our economic growth and prosperity. But what happens in 20, 30, 50 years when millions of super intelligent AIs run the world? They manage the financial system, the military system, the cultural system. How will humanity be able to coexist with a new super intelligent species? This is the big question.
It is a big question. So what do we go from here? What do we do with this? Well, I want to offer, as we kind of wrap up this little first piece of this series, I want to offer us some practical next steps. And that's going to look two different ways depending on your personality type. The first is kind of what we're doing now, which is leaning in and learning about the tools and the technologies that are shaping the world around us. We have some books available from the Bookman, and Becky, who's out in the back there, is going to be running our book table there. And so there's a couple of books that, depending on what your particular bent is, could give you some next steps. So as far as understanding where we're at and how we got here, the few examples we have, this one we talked about last week with the age of surveillance capitalism, understanding the tools that are tracking us online, what that looks like, the fight for the human future at the new frontier of power by Shoshana Zuboff. I've quoted a lot from Filter World. This one can be a little bit technical, but if you want to understand tools like algorithms, how the things that show up on your screen get there, and why they're getting so eerily good at not only predicting your behavior, but actually shaping your behavior, this is a great resource. And then The Siren's Call by Chris Hayes talks about how attention became the world's most endangered resource. So these are 3 examples of things that you can learn that's not fun, but might be necessary. I describe this in the same way that a number of years ago when I was learning about how to be anti-racist and learning about my own preconceptions, I read books like The New Caste System, and I read books on racism that were disturbing and were upsetting, and it really messed with my head because it began to unseat some pre-held ideas that I had. But that kind of education is important and necessary if we're ever going to bring about any type of change. But it's more than just learning. The question is, what can we as human beings do in light of this new world? And if you were to walk away with one resource today, probably the best one is this book that we have here called Digital Minimalism by Cal Newport. And digital minimalism is one of the definitions that we have on our poster back there, which we describe as the intentional use of technology that supports your individual goals and values. We are a values-based community. We choose our speakers, like Melissa who comes in here today. We choose the books that come through, the resources that we offer to support values of open inquiry, to support the values of diversity and the various things that Rod and Andy talked about. These values-driven conversations should matter in our own lives too, and it happens when we identify our own personal values and then begin to craft a relationship with our technology that supports those values, not one that hijacks those values. Another good resource is a book by Jenny Odell called How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy. Either of these are great resources, and my hope is that in the next few months, between now and February, when we wade back into these heavier waters again, that we take some steps ourselves. And I recognize that for a lot of us in here, these tools and technologies may not be as personally impactful to you. You may not notice the effects of AI if you're not watching for it as carefully, but I guarantee that the generations coming up, the kids, the grandkids, the 20-somethings, people like my daughter, are very much swimming in these waters every day. As a matter of fact, they were birthed into these waters, and this is all they've known. So how do we, as a spiritual community, engage with tools that are trying to hijack our attention? They're trying to shape our behavior. It happens when we see these tools and technologies as tools to be used. Cal Newport says this in Digital Minimalism. He says, digital minimalists see new technologies as tools to be used to support things they deeply value, not as sources of value in of themselves. This is contrasting to what we could maybe describe digital maximalism, which is download the latest of every piece of software and get the latest of every tool, and if there's an update, we're going to get it, and we're going to just consume everything blindly without stopping to look. And Cal says it is important to be intentional about our use of technology. Digital minimalism emphasizes intentionality and tools that serve values rather than hijack them. Here's this last quote here from this book this morning. Digital minimalism definitely does not reject the innovations of the internet age, but instead rejects the way that so many people currently engage with these tools. We're going to have one more email that goes out this week, kind of giving some next steps, some educational opportunities that want to go further in this. But my hope is that for all of us, that as we function within this empire of screens, as we think about tools that are coming up and growing around us, like artificial intelligence, as we think about the effects that it will have not only on us, but on the generations to come, that we don't just simply sit back in our comfy rocking chair, with our phones comfortably tucked away, saying we've got it all figured out for ourselves and we don't need to do anything more. But to recognize that we as a spiritual community also have the opportunities to be able to cast examples for the generations to come about what intentional use of technology looks like. To be able to lean into these conversations with grace, with curiosity, without judgment. And I'm grateful for those of you who have been emailing and sending articles and stuff in these last number of weeks. I appreciate your patience because this is a heavy topic, and I'll be glad to get off of this and to move on to some other things myself. But I also appreciate that you're willing to lean into these conversations with eyes wide open, because these are some important things that are affecting us and affecting our world coming up. With that in mind, we're going to invite Worrell to come back up and to bring us back into a happier place. I've always been grateful for our musicians for doing this important role of bringing the artistic perspective to and the artistic voice. And more than sometimes even just the things that we need to say and speak about these things, it's important to not lose our sense of joy, to not lose our sense of wonder. And in a world where things are changing so quickly, that we can recognize we don't have to choose disillusionment, but that there is hope for how to do nothing, for how to embrace new ways of being and living, like digital minimalism. We're going to be talking about this more next year because this is an issue that just won't go away, but I'm grateful for the conversations we've had thus far. So let's have some music and bring ourselves back into a happier place of mind. Thank you.
Wow.